Okay, welcome everyone. As you know, the name of this series is Seasons of the Soul, where we go through learning about the months, learning about the upcoming holidays, significant events. And for those who have been following, we've had so many over the last months. There was Purim, and then Pesach, and then Sfirat HaOmer, and the month of Nisan, the month of Iyar, the month of Sivan. There was Yom HaShoah, and Yom HaTzmaut, and Yom HaZikaron, and Pesach Sheni, and Lag BaOmer, and Shavuos. And now we really have like a gap. The next significant events are not for another 5 weeks, and they're actually a series, 2 fast days. So we have kind of like a gap here, and we've learned about the month of Sivan already. So I was trying to think of what would be appropriate, and what I came up with, this is not a Parsha shir, but we talked a lot about receiving the Torah. Shavuos, Sivan is all about the month that we received the Torah. So it seemed appropriate to me to take this little gap of time and talk about Moshe Rabeinu. Talk about the one that God chose to be the, let's call it the channel through which the Torah was brought down from the upper worlds to this world. And it was Moshe Rabeinu who spent 40 years teaching Israel the Torah, and especially the oral Torah. As we've discussed many times, that without the oral Torah, we simply cannot understand the written Torah. So for 40 years, Moshe Rabeinu was teaching over the oral Torah and, of course, the written Torah. So it just happens in this week's Parsha. Now, every week, Moshe is a major player. But at the end of this Parsha, there's an incident that occurs which God used to let Miriam and Aaron know the difference between the type of prophecy that Moshe receives and the type of prophecy that all other prophets receive. It's a very, very important passage in the Torah. There's only a few verses, but so much has been written about these verses because this is really the most that we know from the written Torah, at least, the nature of prophecy altogether, and especially the type of prophecy that Moshe had and all the other prophets had. So I'm going to go over this passage with you, and then we're going to go through a series of differences that we learn from these verses and other traditions from the Rabbi. So if anyone wants to look, it's in the 12th chapter of the book of Numbers, right from the beginning. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Again, the 12th chapter in the book of Numbers, the beginning. So here you have a case where Miriam and Aaron seemingly complained to God about the wife that Moshe had taken. But according to tradition, it was just the opposite. It was, in a sense, a defense of the wife that Moshe had taken. Why? Is because, according to tradition, after the giving of the Torah, and the incident with the golden calf, so God says to Moshe, tell the people they can now go back to their tents, and you stand here with me. It's explained, what does it mean, go back to your tents? It means that husband and wife could renew marital relations. Because after the golden calf, it was a period of intense tshuva, what happened over there. But God said to Moshe, but you stay here with me. And that was interpreted by Moshe to mean that he should not go back to his wife for marital relations. So here, Miriam and Aaron seem to be complaining that they say, you also talk with us. And we're not commanded not to have relations with our husband or wife. Like what's the thing with Moshe? So in a sense, they were actually defending Moshe's wife. So God says, all three of you come to the tent of meeting. And this is what I will read for you, where God explains to Moshe and Aaron the qualitative difference between their type of prophecy and Moshe's prophecy. So if you want to look, it's in the 6th verse. So it says, that God says to them, listen to my words. If there will be a prophet among you, a prophet of God among you, in a vision, I will make myself known to them. In a dream, I will speak to him. I'll go back over and explain this. Then it says, this is not so with my servant Moshe. In all of my house, he is the faithful one. Mouth to mouth, I speak with him, and in a clear vision, and not in riddles. And the picture of God he sees, why have you spoken out against my servant Moshe? Okay, so this is just 2 or 3 verses, but the rest of the class, we're going to go much deeper into what is actually being said here. What is the difference between Moshe and all the other prophets? So first we see, what's interesting is God says, I will appear to a regular prophet, b'mar'eh, which means a vision. A mar'eh is translated as a vision, but it says the same thing about Moshe. It says, I will speak to him in a vision. So then what's the difference? So it's explained that the type of vision that Moshe got was called the aspaklaria me'ira. It was through a transparent pane. In other words, the prophecy came through like a window that you can see clearly through. But the other prophets also had visions, but their visions were cloudy. They were through a translucent vision. In other words, they saw, but it wasn't absolutely clear. And it's also said in the verses that we read that God says, I will speak to Moshe in a clear vision and not in riddles. Now, what does that mean? So this is a very, very important difference, is that we're told, and then it says, mouth to mouth, I speak to Moshe. In another place, it says face to face. So we'll discuss this more, but for right now, it's very, very important to understand is that other than Moshe, all the other prophets, and we're talking about like the highest individuals we can imagine, But the way that God appeared to them, sometimes, actually we'll see more about this, the experience was so overwhelming that many times the prophet would fall to the ground, would be shaking, would go into a trance, would be like a dream-like reality. And God would give over a message, a concept, an idea. And all of the prophets, through their own language and through their own highly developed sense of imagination, would translate the vision into the words that we have of the prophets. Now, many people are under the impression that when you read Isaiah or Jeremiah or Ezekiel or any of the other prophets, that these are the exact words that God told them to say. But according to tradition, this is not so. Now, there are times where a prophet would transmit exact words from God, but in the most part, they were taking a vision. That's the Torah says in riddles, in metaphor, in symbolic visions, in allegory, in parable. And then they would translate it into a language that the people could understand. The best way I could explain this is, and I'm sure everyone's experienced this a few times, where we have moments of clarity. Could be in prayer, could be in meditation, could be in contemplation, but there's a very, very elevated moment of clarity. And sometimes if you would ask, well, what exactly did you see? What exactly did you learn? What did you hear? A person would not be able to say it, but they would perhaps change their entire life based on the experience that they just had. I'm hoping that you can understand that. We're not talking about an experience we have every day. We're talking about peak moments where we go beyond our usual intellect. Prophecy goes beyond intellect. It's not anti-intellect, of course not, but it's supraconscious. Moshe transmitted the exact words that God told him to. It was a clear vision, a clear vision. So in tradition, Moshe sees through what's called a clear plane, and the other prophets see through what's called a cloudy plane. Now, Rav Ginsburg points out that this word for vision, mar'eh, which is the same thing of asplaklaria me'ira, the same root here, is gematria 246. And Rav Ginsburg points out that 246 is Tselem Elokim, image of God. This is the image of God that Hashem created human beings. The image of God. So here, Moshe is called B'kol Beiti Ne'manhu. He's my faithful servant. And in another place, Moshe is called Ish Elokim, a man of God. So here we see that Moshe is being described in the highest of terms. And in a sense, we could get an idea of what it means to be an image of God. And in a sense, Moshe reaches, but all the other prophets also, because they also saw through, even though it wasn't a clear vision, still the word equals Tselem Elokim. So here we just see a beautiful idea of someone who merits prophecy is on the highest level that a human being, in a sense, can reach, because God is communicating directly with him. And whether it comes in a dream or a cloudy vision or a clear vision, but still, it's God communicating directly with a human being. We'll point out also that in the Torah, it says that God created man b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God. B'tselem Elokim. So we said just now that Tselem Elokim is image of God. But in the Torah, it says b'tselem Elokim. So the letter bet equals 2. So therefore, the phrase b'tselem Elokim equals 248. And that is, number 1, the number of positive mitzvot that there are. There's a beautiful hint that by keeping the positive mitzvot, we are creating ourselves as as a vessel to be a true image of God. And very significantly, 248 is the gematria of Abraham, the first Jew. So here we see the level that Abraham is on, and he's in a sense paving the way for all of us. According to Kabbalistic tradition, Abraham is a Gilgul, is a reincarnation of the first Adam Arishon, who was quite literally created in the image of God. And Avram equals 248, b'tselem Elokim. So this is a very, very beautiful idea. Now let's go through some of the other ones. And here it says, God says, I speak to him mouth to mouth. And in another place it says face to face. So very, very quickly, actually on Shabbat, we actually discussed this for an entire half an hour, but we don't have that much time because I want to get through other material also. But I'm just pointing out there's an obvious contradiction here, because when God reveals the 13 midot of rachamim, the 13 attributes of compassion, so he said to Moshe, no one can see my face and live. You can see my, as it were, my behind, but my face you cannot see. So everyone asks, well, if that's true, why does it say in the Torah that God spoke to Moshe face to face? What does that mean? And further, in last week's parsha, we had Birchat Kohanim, the priestly blessing. And 2 times in the priestly blessing, it says that God will turn his face towards us. So there's also a question, wait, I thought we can't see God's face. So why does it say that God will illuminate his face to you, or he will show his face to you? So there's seemingly a contradiction. So the Gemara deals with this. The Talmud deals with it and says that what it means, it doesn't mean that Moshe saw God's face, as it were. First of all, God doesn't have a physical face. That's another seemingly, not contradiction, but we know that we're talking in the language of human beings. So obviously God does not have a face. So actually it says that a very interesting thing in the Talmud, it says that a teacher, if he wants to give over, or she wants to give over to their student, they have to show a pleasant face towards them. I'm sure everyone can relate to this. I mean, there are teachers that we have that we remember them as being mean and whatever, cruel, uncompassionate, whatever. We probably didn't learn that much from them. And then there are other teachers that we could really relate to, were open to us, you could communicate with them. Those are the teachers that we remember and can shape a person's life. So the Talmud says that's what it means when it says that God spoke to Moshe mouth to mouth or face to face, is that when God was teaching Moshe, he, in a sense, he was the teacher. And he made it in a way that Moshe could feel comfortable with learning from him. Could you imagine having a one-on-one learning session with God? Not so simple. Not so simple. So that's how, in a sense, the contradiction is solved in the Talmud. But still, the fact that the Torah says it means that there is a type of experience where in our mind, in our heart, we feel that we are experiencing, as it were, the face of God. Sometimes, especially in nature, so many times you get to this gorgeous place in nature and you feel God's presence, God's divinity, God's artistry in the nature. And of course, we're not seeing God's face, but it feels like we're seeing a revelation of godliness. Okay, now there's another special quality that we say about Moshe, and that is the phrase that the Shekhinah spoke through the throat of Moshe. We don't say this about any other prophet. The prophet has his vision. He has his dream-like experience. And then he fashions it in a way that it can be given over for eternity. But we say about Moshe that the Shekhinah spoke through him. So how can we understand this? So first of all, if you remember at the burning bush, so Moshe had all kinds of reasons that he felt he was not the right person, he was not fitting. And one of them, he said, I'm not a man of words. I can't speak. How can I be the leader that you want if I can't communicate? So God answers him and says, Mi sam pela adam. Who put a mouth in a person? In other words, if I'm picking you as the leader, I will give you the ability to speak. But at this point, Moshe is extremely reluctant. And a midrash is brought in. Many people have heard this midrash, that after the daughter of Pharaoh adopted Moshe, and he was growing up in the house of Pharaoh. So one time, Moshe, who was 2, 3, 4 years old, he reached up and he took the crown off of Pharaoh's head and he put it on himself. And the wise men, so-called wise men who were there, like said to the Pharaoh, like, "Whoa, did you see what just happened? Like, because we've been predicting that a redeemer is going to come to the Jews. Did you see what just happened? Maybe this is the one, and like, you better get rid of him." So Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, appears in the form of a person, or took over the form of a person and said, wait a minute, why don't we do a test? Because he's a kid. Maybe he's just playing around. Let's put a burning coal and a diamond on a tray, and we'll see which one he goes for. If he goes for the diamond, it's obviously he knows what he's doing. If he goes for the coal and touches the coal, it will prove that he didn't know what he was doing. He just happened to take the crown off your head. So the Midrash goes that Moshe was actually going for the diamond, and Gabriel kind of directed his hand towards the coal. He touched the coal and he burnt his finger. And he put his finger in his mouth to cool it, and he burnt his tongue. This is what the Midrash says, and that from then on, he couldn't speak. He had literally a physical impediment to speaking. So now we can understand at the burning bush when he said, I can't speak. He was actually talking quite literally. So we're told that people knew this about Moshe. So when Moshe was giving over the words of God, so that's how we have this phrase that the Shekhinah spoke through the throat of Moshe. And everyone knew, well, this must be God's presence speaking through Moshe. And of course, the whole last book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, is Moshe speaking. The whole book is in the tense that Moshe is speaking. So here we see this transformation of Moshe from someone who physically could not speak to God speaking through him. So we don't have this about any of the other prophets, this idea that God was speaking through them. People understood they were speaking in God's name. That's a little bit different than God speaking through someone. Now, we're going to go back to the original complaint that Miriam and Aaron had, because it's known that depending on the prophet, there were certain prophets that we have in the books of prophets that God only appeared to them one time. And they wrote down their prophecy, and we have it for eternity. There are other prophets that God came a few times to, and there's certain prophets that God came to much more frequently. But no one was on the level of Moshe, and that's why he separated from his wife, because he felt like before the giving of the Torah, husbands and wives separated for 3 days. God told everyone to marital relations were not had for 3 days before, and everyone purified themselves. So Moshe felt that God can come to me anytime, and he did. I need to be in a constant state of purity. Now, the interesting thing is, one might think, now we're talking about the greatest prophet in Jewish history, and in the whole world. We're told that Bilam was given, in a sense, an equal power of prophecy, because the nations complained, like, whoa, if we had a prophet like Moshe, maybe we would also be a holy people. So God gave them Bilam, but Bilam turned into the exact opposite. Because we have this concept, Zeh l'umat zeh asa Elokim. This against this, or this parallel to this, God created. This is like saying in science, to every action, there's an equal and opposite action. Everything has to be balanced. So one might think, well, Moshe is like the holiest of the holy. Maybe we shouldn't have marital relations at all. Shouldn't we be copying or emulating the greatest of all the prophets? So we're told, no, Moshe's example is not for everyone. And of course, we see in certainly in certain sects of Christianity and in certain Eastern religions where abstinence is considered a requirement for holiness. That is not the Jewish way at all. Of course, there's a time and a place for everything. So here it's very, very interesting that we don't take Moshe as the example that we're supposed to do. And it's actually, Rav Ginsburg has a whole teaching about this, and others as well, is that just like in the time of the temple, the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, could not do the service on Yom Kippur, which was the most important service of the year, unless he was married. It's just the opposite of what others describe as holiness. If, for whatever reason, the wife of the Kohen Gadol would have just passed away, unless he was remarried, he could not do the service. So here we see that there actually is a tradition, even though a lot of people don't talk about it, but Rav Ginsburg has a whole piece about this, that the Mashiach, in a sense, must be married. It's part of a certain tikkun that needs to be made because according to tradition, part of the soul of Mashiach is Moshe. Hua Goel Rishon, Hua Goel Acharon. He is the first Redeemer. He will be the last Redeemer. So part of the soul, not the entire soul, but part of the soul of Mashiach is Moshe. And that actually a tikkun needs to be done for him separating from his wife. Okay, now I want to go back to a very, very deep teaching that Rav Ginsburg gives over. Really, very, very deep teaching. It's brought down in many, many different places that another difference between Moshe and all the other prophets is the words that they used to transmit God's message. So we're told that all the other prophets prophesy with the word ko. Ko means thus, or approximately, or like this. Ko amar Hashem. Thus God said. And this is what we said before, because in most cases, they're not repeating the exact words that God said. They are giving over the message from God. There's no doubt about that, especially today where we can see so many of the prophecies that were predicted that are taking place right now. So we see that they were talking in God's name, but they said, Ko Amar Hashem. Something like this, God said. Whereas Moshe also used the word ko on occasion, but the special thing about Moshe, he used the word zeh, which means this. Zeh hadavar asher amar Hashem. This is what God said, or this is what God commanded. Zeh. So Rav Ginsburg points out an amazing thing, that the word ko that all the other prophets used is Gematria 25. And the 25th word in the Torah is the word light. The first appearance where God said, Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or, that word or is the 25th word. The 12th word, the word zeh, that Moshe used, interesting enough, is the 12th word in the Torah is the word choshech, darkness. So you would think, what does this mean? All the other prophets, there's a hint that they are transmitting the light of God. And Moshe, what are we going to say? He's transmitting the darkness of God? So Rav Ginsburg explains, and many other books of Kabbalah and Chassidut explain, and especially Rav Ginsburg, he says there's 4 levels to darkness and light. Why does the word darkness appear first in the Torah before light? So we have the expression that we use all the time to try to describe God as being infinite. So we say Ein Sof. Literally, there is no end, which translated means infinite. But Ein also means nothingness. So we're told that the first stage is a type of darkness that we can relate to a womb. Where does life come from? Where does the creation of a new soul come from? The fetus is in the womb. And symbolically, it's a dark place. But from that darkness comes a new creation. So then we talk about the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light of God. So in a certain way, the Choshech, darkness, comes first, is more primordial, because this is the infinite nothingness from which everything comes. It's highly paradoxical, but from the darkness comes the light. So then you have the infinite light of God. And then the Ari explain, okay, you have the infinite light of God. Then now God wants to create a world. Where is a finite world going to be placed? Everything's the infinite light of God. So that's the whole teaching, what's called Tzimtzum, that God contracted his infinite light, and what was left? A dark vacuum. And into that dark vacuum, into the middle of the vacuum, God shone what's called the Kav, a beam of light. And from that beam of light comes all of creation. So the vacuum is darkness again, and the ray of light from which all creation comes is light. So for those who are following, hopefully it wasn't too complicated. You have darkness, Ein Sof. Then you have the Or Ein Sof, the light that comes from the darkness. Then you have the darkness of the Tzimtzum. And then you have the light of God now coming in and creating all the worlds. So why did I say, it's very interesting in of itself, but what it's teaching us is when Moshe says, Zeh hadavar asher tziva Hashem, this is the thing that God commanded. He was tapping in to a higher place than even the light, a more primordial place, because only Moshe could get there. All the other prophets of the 4 worlds of creation, only Moshe was in his prophecy came from the highest level of the world of Atzilut, the world of emanation. The prophecy of Isaiah, Yeshayahu, came from the world of Bria, the world of creation. And then below that, the prophecy of Yechezkel, Ezekiel, came from the world of formation, of Yetzirah. And below that came the prophecies of Zechariah, in the world of Asiyah, also Daniel. So that's just an amazing idea that Moshe was tapping in to a place that none of the other prophets could tap in. I mean, what a high level to tap into the light of God. But Moshe was tapping into a more primordial darkness. And actually, in the Zohar, it describes this primordial darkness as shining more than we even can conceive of light shining. Because we think of darkness as an absence of light. But this type of darkness is not an absence of light. It's its own reality. And on the deepest, highest, most primordial level, it's shining, in a sense, more than even light. So this is where Moshe's prophecy is coming from. Okay, so we're going to stop here for right now. And next week, we'll see, but there's a chance that we will continue talking about Moshe, again, because of his connection to the month of Sivan, to Shavuos, to the receiving of the Torah. So we'll end with a blessing like we always do, that halavai, we were vessels for the word of God. And there's an expression that actually it's said that at the time of the Second Temple, there were 1 million people on the level of prophecy. It's hard for us to even imagine such a thing. According to the books of the Bible and our tradition, there were 48 male prophets and 7 female prophetesses. So where were the 1 million? But we're told that these teachings were so open of how to reach such a high level of spirituality that there were 1 million prophets in Israel. And we do have a clear tradition that when Mashiach comes, and as the Messianic era comes closer, the spirit of prophecy will return. And I'll just end in just a very, very important statement that really comes from the Ramchal, who says, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, who said that we don't have prophets anymore, and the age of prophecy ended long ago, but prophetic experience and what's called Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, never ended. And so every person has a spark of the possibility of Ruach HaKodesh and prophetic experience, which is different than being a prophet. So we should all merit, as the Messianic era comes closer, that in a sense we all can develop that type of divine inspiration.